The morning they fired him, Tobena was on his knees in the rose bed by the east wall. And the new estate manager did not wait for him to stand. He spoke down to the back of an old man's neck at 7:14 a.m., a clipboard pressed to his chest. And the words he used were restructuring and going a different direction, and your last day will be Friday. Tobena did not argue. He set down the small hand fork he had been using, the one with the worn wooden handle, and he pressed his palms flat against the soil for a moment, the way another man might steady himself on a railing. Then he stood, slowly, because his knees were 68 years old, and had spent 30 of those years in this particular dirt. He thanked the manager. He actually thanked him. And the manager, who did not know what he was standing on, nodded and walked back toward the house, and never once wondered why the old gardener had touched the ground like that before he rose. Tobena Mensah was 68 years old. He was lean in the way of men who have done physical work their whole lives, and never once for sport. With forearms that looked carved and a back that had begun, in the last year or so, to ask him questions in the early cold. He weighed 71 kilograms, 4 less than he had the previous spring, though no one had noticed because no one looked closely at the gardener. And he had not mentioned to anyone that food had stopped tasting like much since his wife passed 16 months before. He wore the same green work trousers he had worn for years, patched once at the right knee with fabric that almost matched, and a flat cap, navy blue, faded nearly to gray at the crown. The cap had been a gift. His wife had bought it for him the year they were married, 41 years ago, from a market stall in Kumasi, and he had worn out 4 others over the decades, but had never worn this one to work, never let it touch the soil, kept it on the hook by the door of the small groundskeeper's cottage, and wore it only on Sundays. After she died, he began to wear it every day. It was the one decision he had made about his grief, and he had made it without telling anyone. He kept one other thing. In the breast pocket of every shirt he owned, he carried a folded piece of paper that had gone soft as cloth from 40 years of folding and unfolding. It was a land document. The original deed to 40 acres of hill above the town, drawn up in 1979, with a surveyor's seal in the corner and a signature at the bottom in a younger man's hand. His own. He did not look at it often. He simply carried it, the way some men carry a photograph, the way his wife had carried until the end, the small enamel cup her own grandmother had left her. A thing that has served you, you do not discard because the world has stopped seeing its worth. What Tobena wanted was very small, and it had not changed in 30 years. He wanted to keep his hands in that soil until the soil took him. He wanted the roses by the east wall to bloom one more season, because he had bred that particular rose himself, crossing 2 stems over 4 patient years until he got the deep red he had been seeing in his mind. And he had named it, quietly, after his wife, and never told the family who owned the estate that the most beautiful thing on their grounds carried a dead woman's name. That was all. He was not trying to take anything back. He had made his peace with the largest loss of his life a long time ago, or believed he had, which is not the same thing, but it served him well enough until the morning a man with a clipboard told him Friday would be his last day. He did not bang on the door of the main house. He did not say the thing he could have said, the thing that would have stopped the manager's heart in his chest. He went back to the cottage at the end of his shift, and he made tea in the kitchen where his wife had made tea. And he sat at the table and looked at the deed for the first time in many months. And he thought about how a man can own the ground beneath another man's feet and still be told to leave it on a Friday. And he folded the paper again along its soft creases and put it back in his pocket. He had 4 days left. He intended to spend them on the roses. The estate was called Hillcrest now. It had not always been called that. The family that owned it, the Adeyemis, had bought it 29 years ago from a development company. And the development company had bought it 29 years, and some months before that, from a man who had fallen on a particular kind of hard time. And the Adeyemis had never thought to ask who that man was or where he had gone, because why would they? They were not cruel people. The elder Mr. Adeyemi, who had died 4 years back, had been gruff but fair, had let the gardener live in the cottage rent-free as part of his wages, had nodded to him across the lawn for 25 years. It was the son who had brought in the new manager. The son lived mostly abroad and saw the estate as a number on a statement, and the number needed improving, and a 68-year-old gardener on full wages with a free cottage was, on a spreadsheet, a thing to be restructured. No one in this story set out to do a cruel thing. They simply arranged their reasonable decisions in a row. And the row formed a wall. And an old man stood on the wrong side of it with a soft piece of paper in his pocket that proved he had built the ground the wall stood on. The new manager's name was Gerald, and he wore a lanyard with his photograph on it, even though there were only 6 staff on the whole estate, and everyone knew his face by the second day. He had a way of looking at the grounds that took in the cost of everything and the meaning of nothing. He saw the rose bed by the east wall as labor hours. He had already decided, though he had not yet said it, that the bed would be graveled over in the spring, because gravel did not need a gardener. He passed Tobena twice on the Wednesday and did not say good morning either time. There was a young woman who worked in the kitchen, Amma, 23, who saw the old man eating his lunch alone on the low wall by the tool shed on the Thursday, and who came out with a mug of ginger tea she had made without being asked, and set it down beside him and said only, "It's cold today, Mr. Mensah." She did not know anything. She was simply the one person on that estate who looked at the gardener and saw a man. He thanked her. He drank the tea slowly, both hands around the mug, and something in his chest that had been clenched since Tuesday loosened by a small degree. And he noticed, the way he noticed everything growing, that she had a kind way of standing, slightly turned toward whoever she spoke to, as though she did not want them to feel alone in the conversation. It was Amma, on the Thursday afternoon, who mentioned the photographs. She was new, only 3 months in the job, and she had been clearing out a damp storeroom behind the kitchen and found a box of old framed pictures from the estate's history, the kind a previous owner hangs in a hallway and a new owner takes down. She thought the old gardener might like to see them, since he'd been here longest. She brought the box out to the tool shed. And in the box, beneath photographs of the house in different decades and a cricket team from the 50s and a wedding on the lawn, there was a single image of the hill before the house was built. Bare land, 40 acres of slope under a wide sky. And standing in the middle of it, young, with a surveyor beside him and a roll of plans under his arm and a navy blue cap on his head, was a man Amma did not recognize, but whose face, she realized slowly, looking up at the old man across the box, was the same face, 50 years thinner, under the same cap. She did not understand what she was looking at, but she asked the question that opened everything. She said, "Mr. Mensah, is this you?" If you have ever watched someone discover, by accident, the thing another person had quietly carried alone for half their life, subscribe and stay with me, because what Amma did with what she learned in the next few minutes was not what the old man would have chosen, and it changed the direction of everything that came after. The full story did not come from Tobena, who only nodded once at the photograph and said, "A long time ago," and would have said no more. It came from Constance, who ran the small produce stall down at the bottom of the hill road and had run it for 36 years and had known the town when the town was smaller. Amma, who could not let it go, walked down that evening and described the photograph and the man, and Constance set down the knife she was using to trim the ends off bunches of greens, and she was quiet for a moment. "Mensah," she said. "Tobena Mensah." And then she told the girl what the spreadsheets had never recorded. The hill had been his family's land for 3 generations. He had inherited the 40 acres as a young man and had meant to farm it. But the years he came into it were bad years. And there was a debt that was not his fault. A brother's debt. A guarantee signed in good faith. A business that failed and pulled Tobena's land down with it through a clause he had not fully understood. And a lawyer who had not fully explained. He had lost the hill to the development company in a single afternoon in a solicitor's office. Lost the ground his grandfather had cleared and his father had planted. And he had been a young man with a young wife and no money and no way to fight it. The company had built the house. The Adeyemis had bought the house. And Tobena, who could not bear to leave the only land his family had ever loved, had done the one thing left to a man in his position. He had applied for the job of gardener. He had said nothing about who he was. And for 30 years he had tended, on wages as an employee, the soil that his own grandfather had cleared by hand. And he had asked for nothing back from it but the right to keep his hands in it. And he had bred a red rose on the east wall and named it after the wife who had stood with him in the solicitor's office on the worst afternoon of their lives, and never once blamed him. What Constance said next changed the direction of everything that followed. The deed he carried, the soft paper in his breast pocket, was not, Constance believed, merely a keepsake. There had been talk, years ago, of an irregularity in the original transfer. The guarantee Tobena had signed for his brother had been called in. But the way the land itself had been seized, the speed of it, the clause invoked. There had been a solicitor in town, long retired now, who had always said the transfer would not have survived a proper challenge. That the development company had moved fast precisely because a slow look would have undone them. And that a young, frightened, grieving man had simply not had the money or the heart to make anyone look slowly. The deed in Tobena's pocket was the original. He had never surrendered it. And an original deed, never voided through a transfer that a careful eye might call defective, is not nothing. It is a question with a seal on it. It is a door that was never properly closed. Amma did not have the money or the standing to open that door. But she knew someone who did. The young Mr. Adeyemi, the owner, the one who lived abroad and saw the estate as a number, he was, despite everything, his father's son. And his father had respected the old gardener for 25 years for reasons the son had never bothered to learn. Amma did a thing that was not her place to do, and was exactly the right thing to do. She found the owner's email on a notice in the kitchen office, and she wrote to him directly. A kitchen girl 3 months in the job writing to the man who could dismiss her with a sentence. And she attached a photograph she had taken on her phone of an old picture of a young man on a bare hill. And she wrote, in plain words, who the gardener was and what she had learned, and she ended the message with one line. I think your father knew. I think that is why he let him stay. The quiet power in this story did not arrive in a car. He arrived in a reply, and then, 11 days later, in person. The owner flew home. He did not announce it to Gerald. He came up the hill road on a gray morning and found the old man not in the rose bed, but in the cottage, packing the few things he owned into 2 boxes, because Friday had been and gone, and Tobena was a man who did what he was told. The owner knocked on the cottage door. When Tobena opened it, the younger man looked at him for a long moment, at the navy cap, at the lean carved hands, and he did not say, restructuring, and he did not say, going a different direction. he said 4 words. "This is your land." And then, because some things must be said plainly, it always was. Gerald was not punished with a scene. That is not how this kind of justice works. He was simply, quietly, no longer the right fit. And the spreadsheet that had cost a man his roses was reviewed by someone who had learned, in 11 days, that a number on a statement is the least true thing you can know about a place. The estate's solicitors looked, finally, slowly, at the original transfer, the way no one had looked in 50 years. Whether the courts would ever have formally overturned a half-century-old deed, the owner did not wait to find out. He did not need a court to tell him what was right. He restored the land to Tobenna's name himself by his own arrangement, and asked only that the old man let him visit the roses sometimes. And the gardener, who was not a gardener anymore, but the owner of 40 acres of hill, as he had been born to be, said that he could, and that there was a particular red one by the east wall he would like to show him and tell him the name of. Gerald believed he had handed an old man an ending. A Friday, a clipboard, a cottage to empty into 2 boxes. But the truth is that you cannot dismiss a man from ground that was already his, and you cannot restructure away a thing that is carried, folded soft as cloth, against a person's heart for 40 years. Tobenna had been left by the worst afternoon of his life, with a piece of paper and a pair of hands and the knowledge of exactly what he was made of. And those were the 3 things no clipboard could reach and no spreadsheet could cost out. You can take a man's land in a single afternoon in a solicitor's office. You can change his title from owner to employee and pay him wages to tend the ground his grandfather cleared. You can fire him at 7:14 on a Tuesday and tell him Friday is his last day. But you cannot unknow what a man knows about the soil he was born on, and you cannot unmake what his hands have learned. And the deed you are most certain has been closed is sometimes only a door that no one, until now, was willing to look at slowly. And the first morning the hill was his again. Tobenna walked out before the light was full and stood in the middle of the 40 acres the way he had stood in the old photograph 50 years before. A navy cap on his head and the soft deed in his pocket and no surveyor beside him now. Only the rose he had bred by the east wall, opening deep red against the gray stone, carrying a name he could finally say out loud on land that would never be taken from him again. If you spent 30 years tending something that had been stolen from you, asking for nothing but the right to keep your hands in it, would you have the patience to wait that long without bitterness? And if the door you thought was closed forever turned out to have never been properly shut, would you still have the strength left to walk back through it? Leave your answer in the comments. I really want to read it. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until the day they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.